All right, well, we can probably go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. I know we have a couple of friends here in person and some joining virtually from elsewhere. And we may have some more people hopping on as we go. But we appreciate you all being here and appreciate Logan being here from the tribe of Oklahoma. My name is Kelsey Winters. I'm the head of Museum Services and Special Projects for the History Center at the Marion Public Library. And we are very excited to have Logan here to speak with us today about Miami people and Miami land. I'll let him say the Miami version of that title because I'm sure I would not do it justice. So without further ado, we'll let Logan get started for us.
My name is Logan York. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. Thank you guys very much for having me here today. I'm going to share my screen so that I can do this presentation. And if you guys have questions at any time, please just let me know. I'm more than willing and happy to answer questions throughout the entire thing. It does not just have to be at the end. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about myaamiaki, neehi, myaamionki, Miami people and Miami land, and our history. So our first story, as Miami people, we call our emergence story or our coming out story. This was located in the South Bend region, just off of Lake Michigan. This is a story that involves us coming out of the water, as you can see in this mural here. There is some debate on whether it is a historical narrative, if this is an ethnogenesis, not a genesis. So this is where we're coming down from Canada, and this is when we separate as a separate people. But either way, this is when Miami people really became our own thing, was in the South Bend region. We have since extended into the rest of myaamionki. Kikaionge, which is one of these stars on this map here. Right here, you can see it here. That was our biggest village site along the Wabash River Valley. But this is myaamionki. This is how I grew up learning about our homelands, which is a bit confusing for people who aren't used to it. So we use the rivers as the centers of our civilization rather than the borders of it, which makes it a little bit harder for a lot of Western people to really conceptualize where this map is. Here's a map that might be a little bit easier for most people to understand. The Wabash River, you can see it right here. That's really the center of our homelands, our heartlands, but our homelands really extend into Illinois, up into Michigan, into Ohio. In Wisconsin for a little while during the Beaver Wars, we actually went and lived with our relatives, the Potawatomi, to get away from a lot of the warfare that was happening. But right after that was done, we immediately came back into our homelands of Indiana. Actually, sometimes it gets me in trouble because I grew up with this map. I'll be giving a presentation, and it's the same presentation whether I'm in Ohio or Indiana. And then sometimes I'll forget which state I'm in when I'm looking at this map. And when I say some facts later on, it can get me into trouble because it's not necessarily true. So we lived in myaamionki since time immemorial, is what we say. Here you can see an early French depiction of some either Miami or Illinois people. Those are these tattooed people here. We were a very heavily tattooed people. This is down in Louisiana. So this is some of our traders who were going down south. You also see some Sauk and Fox people who are the non-tattooed people. And I think the rest of these are all Sauk and Fox plus us. And we would have lived here since time immemorial. That's how we phrase it, because there's no way to count how long we've been here. So we've always been here. That started to become contentious around the 1760s. With the Treaty of Paris, the French gave the British their claims to myaamionki. The only problem with that is that they did not have even the poor excuse of right of conquest. They didn't actually ever beat us. Neither did the Iroquois. So when they gave the British their claim, they're giving this idea of the Northwest Territory to the British, but they didn't actually own it yet. Not even by their laws did they own it yet. 2 decades later, at the next Treaty of Paris, the British ceded their claimed lands to the myaamionki, the Americans. And this started the Mishamalsa Wars, our wars with the Americans. Unfortunately, or however you want to look at it, the Americans winning was really our worst case scenario. We had really good relations with the French. We actually still have pretty good relations with the French. We generally preferred them over the British, but eventually we started working more with the British. And then the British obviously ceded their land claims to the Americans, who were our worst case scenario. So you can even tell by our name of Americans at the time. Now it's different. But Mishamalsa means big swords, because the first thing that we ever did with any Americans was fight with them. So generally when we name a people, our exonyms for people really describe our relationship to them or something about them. My favorite is our word for Germans, which means poor speakers, because our accents really didn't work together very well. But the Mishamalsa, the big knives, were, our worst enemies at this point in time. Here you can see a depiction of Mishikanakwa, or Little Turtle, and Anthony Wayne, which isn't necessarily true, but I find it dramatic to look at. Our wars with the Americans started well before Anthony Wayne was in the area and well before Mishikanakwa was a war chief. But that's what started it. It started our wars, started our fighting with them. But despite the fact that we would win, it didn't really matter. By the 1790s, really even the 1750s, military resistance was really past its time. It wasn't going to work anymore. At least that's how we saw it, the Miami. That's how we saw it. And with the Battle of Fallen Timbers, Little Turtle actually didn't want to fight that war. He didn't want to fight in Fallen Timbers. So he actually really got demoted for that battle. And he helped press for trying to make peace with the Americans. This led to the Treaty of Greenville, which you can see ceded most of Ohio and little pockets for military uses. The reason you'll see these things around here is that forts were built there, and this would help, really it would help subjugate us. It wouldn't allow us to rise up militarily so easily again. Unfortunately, and this is something that Little Turtle remarked on in his life, that this started an unfortunate trend, a trend of treaty making and treaty breaking. And every single treaty, they took more and more and more of myaamionki, of Miami land, until there were just a few small portions of it left. This is one of the council houses that would have had treaty negotiations done in it. So this is actually one of the houses that would have had treaty negotiations. Unfortunately, a local historian tore it down, thinking it was just an old shed that somebody had built in the 1970s. So we almost had one of our treaty houses still in existence to this day that was built by Miami people for these purposes. We have a treaty house, 2 treaty houses that were built post 1795, though. And in 1840, Pinjua J.B. Richardville, he was our principal chief at the time, thought he saw the writing on the wall. The Americans were pressing us and pressing us and pressing us to cede our lands and move west of the Mississippi. And he really only saw a couple of options. In his head, either we moved west of the Mississippi or one of 2 things would happen. we would completely assimilate with the Americans and just fizzle out to no longer be Miami people, or the Americans would find some kind of excuse to attack us again and forcibly remove us. So in 1840, he agreed to Miami removal west of the Mississippi at the Treaty of 1840. Unfortunately for him, and to this day, Miami people are a quietly stubborn people. We don't raise a big fuss, but if we don't want to do it, we just don't do it. So in 1846, we're still living in myaamionki. We're still improving our land. We're still building barns, because when he got back, most Miami people didn't want to leave. And this actually led to a series of individual family exemptions from removal. So we think that that was the avenue that our people were trying to take, finding legal ways to get out of removal west of the Mississippi. And roughly half of us got it. Some of them, well, a large portion of them still live in Indiana today, or their descendants still live in Indiana today. But sadly, the US government got tired of waiting, got tired of the legal battles. So on September 26th of 1846, the US troops arrived in Peru and rounded all of the Miami people they could find up at gunpoint that were not exempt from forced removal. When they did, it took them a few days to round everybody up, finding some of the smaller hamlets and some of the smaller villages around. So from September 26th to October 6th, people were loaded onto these canal boats and forced to stay there. So these were mobile prison units for us. And as you can see, it took until November to actually get there, a whole month of traveling on these little bitty canal boats for our entire people. And we were not a boating people, so it was not a pleasant experience for us. There was a lot of dysentery on these ships, boats, really, canal boats. It was really hot October, and there was not many windows on them, so it was really hot, stuffy, and it really promoted us getting really sick. When I say we weren't a boating people, I mean there's a lot of accounts of us actually just running next to rivers rather than canoeing down them, because that's what that was our preferred mode of travel, not using canoes. Here you can see a picture of Cincinnati, which is one of our stopping points along our forced removal. Not many major renovations happened between 1846 and 1848 when this photo was taken. So this is probably exactly what we saw. These are the kinds of boats that we were put onto when we got off the canal boats, actually on this public landing here on the bottom left. And you can see there's like the white upper part of the boat and then a black under part of the boat. And we were actually put in the understory with all of the sheep and pigs. So we still have the original manifests of these boats. And we are not on the passenger list. We are on the inventory list. So we were down literally with the pigs and sheep and stores of flour and such things. So they didn't even consider us people on this forced removal. And by the time we got to St. Louis, some of the soldiers there actually were, there's recordings of them begging the guards to treat us better because of how poor the conditions were. And really, you should really stop and think about that, because the soldiers in St. Louis were actively fighting the Plains tribes at that time. So these are Indian fighters begging soldiers to treat Indians better. And the optics of that are not lost on us. So the conditions of this forced removal were quite bad. But finally, on November 1st, after this long trip, we landed in the Kansas Landing, what is today Kansas City. And then we had to hike down to Sugar Creek, which was our first reservation in Kansas. Unfortunately, when we got there, all of the cabins that we had agreed to remove west of the Mississippi River for weren't built. So we actually spent that first winter in canvas tents. And more people died that first winter than the forced removal at all. Several times more people died that winter. due to the poor conditions, living conditions, and food stores that we had. And then we lived there for about 20 years. And then it was discovered that there was oil nearby, not on our land, but nearby, and that it was really good farmland. So it was too good for us to have. So in 1867, we were removed. Here's Sugar Creek, our original reservation in Kansas. In 1867, we were removed to Indian Territory, what is today Ottawa County, Oklahoma, and we were put in with a bunch of other tribes. Today, it's not such an issue. We actually generally are on really good terms with other tribes. We back each other up. We help each other out when possible. In 1867, that was not necessarily the case. So they put us in the same county as the Seneca Cayuga. The Seneca were somebody we had been warring with for at least 200 years at that point. So it caused a lot of strife and a lot of political turmoil or when we originally got down there, because these were our mortal enemies, and we were, on threat of violence from the U.S., could not fight them, and we had to stay within the bounds of our reservation. Today, not a big deal. We love the Seneca Cayuga. We have a yearly game with them. It's a lot of fun. So today, it's not such a big deal. But when we first were removed there, it did cause a lot of issues. Today, this is our Miami tribal leadership. This is our government, our business council, as it's called. The man in the center is our chief. That is what we have. Other tribes do have presidents, governors, chairmen. We have lots of different words for our tribal governments, but these are the people that make our cultural resource office possible. They're the ones that help support this. And our culture is going through a revitalization process. So despite forced removal, despite the boarding schools, despite everything that the U.S. tried to do to destroy Native cultures, it didn't work. So our revitalization is going quite strong right now. We are revitalizing our dances, stomp dance. This is actually more traditional than powwow dancing. Powwow dancing is something that happened post forced removal of the Eastern Woodland tribes. And then when we started to interact with a lot of Plains tribes, powwows was a kind of a fusion of those dance cultures. And that's where we get powwows today. So stomp dancing is actually more traditional for us. What it involves a fire in the center, or a fake fire, as you can see in this photo, we're inside. And then it's a follow the leader in a big circle. You get wider and wider and wider. And it's actually more about the singing than the dancing. So you literally just stomp in a circle, but you have songs. You have a leader who sings the lyrics, and then you have the rest of the men are callers, and they will call back to the singer. And most of the women are shakers, so they actually will have rattles or cans along on their legs to make the rhythm of the music. And it's all about building unity. So this is not a dance to show off to the community about how good you are. This dance is about building community, making unity, making us all work together to make this song. And it's really interesting because when you have a good stomp leader and you have a good first shaker, the entire group will all spin all at once, despite where you are in the circle. And what happens is it creates this optical illusion that you all are standing still and the world starts to spin around you. And I always thought that was really, really cool, and always is a mark of a really good shaker and leader, because they're the ones that can make that happen. Our storytelling, we're lucky enough that most of our stories were written down. So a lot of our traditional storytelling we still do today. Most of our storytelling are ala sukane. There are winter stories. They can only be told in the winter. And that's a really important thing for us that we do. We have gatherings. We tell them in private. So we do have private gatherings where we just tell them to family. We have school groups that we'll tell them to. And we also have large national gatherings down in Oklahoma where we will tell some of our traditional stories. And we're really lucky, and everyone really loves it. We've also started revitalizing art styles. So here are some painted hide robes that are at the Musée de Quai Branly, a Parisian museum right next to the Eiffel Tower. And I've been lucky enough to have been a part of the research group that has been studying them, and we are actively revitalizing this art form. I've been really lucky to be a part of it. I'm really excited to see where it goes. Some of these bags, exact same thing. And this is a really good example of this bag is almost like dipped in a clear coat. So when you're wearing these robes and you're wearing these bags, normally they're a matching set. They shimmer and shine when you're in the sun because of that clear coat that you'll see on them. Today we're working on revitalizing this art form, and this is one of our artists' bags that they made. They tanned the hide, they made the paint, they painted this bag. That's something that we're actively working on. Another thing that we're actively working on, and it kind of matches this, is our tattooing practices. That is starting to become more and more important to us again. Our tattooing practices completely died out post-removal. They started to die out in the late 1700s, just as we had more interactions with Western Europe. They who did not like tattooing, especially on the face and lower arms where you couldn't cover it up. That started to fizzle away, and then it eventually went to sleep. Today, that is starting to become revitalized again. So you can see here, I had actually had most of these painted hide robes tattooed on me well prior to actually being there to see them. That's something that I'll never forget. And it was kind of funny. When we were at this museum, you know, the French, they're very proper, they're very polite. We had just got finished listening to a story of a 1725 delegation of people, Illinois and Miami people, who went to Paris to talk to the king. And it went incredibly well. They got along great, except they couldn't keep the native people who went, they couldn't keep their shirts on because they would get hot. And for us, we're not modest. We weren't a modest people. So we would just take our shirts off if we got hot, which was obviously a huge scandal in Paris in the 1720s. And we had just finished listening to the story when the museum curator came up to me and told me that the film crew was here. Please take your shirt off. And it caused a lot of laughs in that small room because of it, just the dry tone she said it in. This is another photo of that. This is a photo, a painted hide of Chinguia, which is one of our other than human beings that we have in our, we'll call it mythology, but that's probably not the right word. Another thing that we're revitalizing is Pikitaha Minge, or lacrosse. As you can see there, our traditional style sticks are a little bit different than you might be used to. You can see a few people here using American style sticks made of metal and plastic. Those are based off of Iroquoian style sticks. We consider the Iroquois to be the creators of lacrosse, or at least we consider them to be the keepers of lacrosse. It's their game that we play. Our sticks are different. We only have one rule in lacrosse. Don't touch the ball with your hand. That's it. You can do anything else. But you have to remember that if you feel like whacking somebody across the back, that there's about 30 people on their team who are going to do it right back to you. And your parents and probably their parents are in the crowd watching. So generally the games are pretty tame, though injuries do happen because we don't wear sports gear, any kind of protection except for the goalie when we play the Seneca Cayuga. For us, we don't have goals. When we play other tribes, we do, just so we can actually score, because traditionally we would use saplings or wooden poles, and not big ones either. So it would be about this big of a goal that you would have to hit, and you can't get very close to it. So your aim really has to be good. This is something that we have been working on for a long time, is relearning how to make these sticks, because that practice also went to sleep for us. Now we've mastered it, so it's something that we're we're really excited about. We host workshops all the time, teaching our younger folks how to make these lacrosse sticks, and it's really exciting, and it's completely the opposite of playing with an Iroquoian style lacrosse stick. If you've ever played lacrosse, all the rules that you know are backwards when you're using these sticks. Um, and the glue that holds all of these revitalization processes together is our language. So we host classes. We have online classes. We have a college course. We have online dictionaries. We have memorized lesson plans. Because what we found is that as fun as lacrosse is, as fun as stomp dancing is, if you don't have the language to hold it all together, it eventually just starts to fizzle away. But the glue of all of these things, the glue of culture that we're finding is language. It's the thing that gets people interested and makes them stay. And it's working. So our myaamionki program, our kids' summer camps, so we have from preschool up to college courses for people in the summer, week-long college programs that we host in Oklahoma and we host in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where kids who don't have access to a lot of this knowledge at home, they can go and learn about being Miami at these places. They can learn our botany, our ethnobotany. They can learn about how we do language, about how we think about our place in nature, about how we learn, because we learn differently. Our history, it's all different. So this is a place where they can come and learn, and it's working. We have kids right now who can run around speaking myaamiaki so well that I can't hardly understand them anymore, because they're speaking it so fast and so well that I can't keep up. And it's really encouraging to know that eventually we're going to have first language speakers again. We think by the time my grandkids' generation comes around, that might be their first language again. And that's something that we're really working toward and really striving towards. And it's really exciting. And it oftentimes people will get emotional talking about it, just because of all the things that our people have gone through, that we're able to turn this around, and it's happening right before our eyes. This is one of the big college groups of people up in Fort Wayne, and some of the little kids they're helping counsel. Achimotatiangwe, a Miamia community blog, is something that I would encourage everyone to go to. This is a place that we send not only outside groups, but also some of our higher end education stuff goes into this. We call it a community blog, but it is something that talks about everything. Our high-end scholars will post articles here. We'll talk about community events that are coming up. This is a place that if you want to know anything about myaamionki or myaamiaki, Miami people or Miami land, this blog is really the place you want to go to. It has amazing resources for curriculum for students. It has good information if you're looking for ethnobotany or history. It has modern day cultural things in it. Sometimes it gives you little hints about upcoming books that are coming out. I would really recommend going to it if you can. And yeah, so that's kind of the end of my official presentation. I really hope that you guys are kind of get where we're coming to. Our history was not always great, but we are not a people of the past. We're a people with a past. We're looking forward. Our culture is growing stronger and stronger every day. We have national gatherings several times a year. We have college programs in multiple different places. We have relationships with different countries again. So our culture, our tribe is really coming back stronger than ever now. And that's something, if you guys don't remember anything else about today, just remember that we're still here and that we're strong again. And if anyone has any questions whatsoever, I would be happy to hear them. I would encourage any questions that you guys can think of, and there is no low bar. I've been asked if I live in a teepee before, so that is kind of the level that we're talking about. So if you guys want to ask any questions, I promise you other people are also thinking of them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
By the way, hello. We've met before.
Yes, we have.
I have an interest in the history of the Miami in the area of the Mississinawa. I'm from, well, as you know, from Marion.
Mm-hmm.
And I also was a teacher for many years in the Marion schools. My question is from the Miami perspective, the best source of history of this area from, I'll just arbitrarily pick from 1812 through 1900, because there was well, I'll just ask, what are the best sources of information? I see pieces around, there's this and there's this,
Well,
but
to be honest, there's not a lot of good ones. A lot of the time, you have to find primary and secondary sources and read them with a big helping of salt, because you have to understand that even these primary sources that are recording things as they're happening, they're being recorded by people who are very racist. They're racist and xenophobic. So the things they're seeing, a lot of the time, they're either misunderstanding or misconstruing. That blog has a lot of stuff on the Mississinawa area, especially around the Battle of the Mississinawa. If you needed better resources, I would either email the historians who are in charge of that blog, or me, and we could help start going down that rabbit hole and finding better resources. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything besides those. I wouldn't. I would also hesitate to construe 1812 to 1900 in the same vein, because after 46, it's a completely different area, right. A completely different kind of history, what's happening. So in 1812, you still have Tecumseh. Things are like warfare is happening. Our history is happening separately than what it's not really separately, but it's different than post-removal. The things that are happening, the politics that are happening are completely different. So I would split those in two avenues of research, if I could.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go to the blog if you want anything on that stuff. It's really, really good.
Well, if I might, another quick one. This again is post 1812, but we know the renewed interest or rediscovery, I guess, of the Indian schools and the horrible situation that affected, to one degree, they're almost all indigenous people in the United States. But as I understand it, there was such a place in Wabash County. But it didn't involve the Miami, because they weren't about to bring Miami back to their history.
Yeah.
I mean, what I understand was the Miamis were sent elsewhere. Is that true?
I believe so, yes. I don't, unless, of course, our citizens who stayed in the Indiana region, because
right.
about 300 to 400 actually got out of forced removal with individual family exemptions. They might have sent them there. But yes, I'm pretty sure we were down in Oklahoma and maybe Kansas, the boarding schools. No, the boarding school history it's really bad. It's really hard to read about because of the things that were happening there. That was the place that did, some of the worst damage to Native cultures, was the boarding schools and the splitting up of reservation lands into individual family allotments. That did more damage than warfare ever did. The boarding schools forced our children to become someone they weren't. Oftentimes that involved actual torture, waterboarding, electric therapy, beatings when they would speak our language or talk about our cultures. So it's really hard to read about some of the accounts that happened there and all the students who died, who didn't get to make it back home. And that stuff didn't stop until quite recently. I know many people who went to boarding schools. I know people who went through electric therapy in Canada. So like the idea that all that happened a super long time ago is not true. The last boarding schools in the US closed in the 70s. So the young kids who went through that process, they're very much still alive today. And that those scars on them and our cultures is very much still a part of us, though we are trying to grow past them.
Logan, we have a question in the chat, and then I know we have one in person here as well. Serena asked in the chat, what is the relationship between the Miami and the Potawatomi? And she said, I'm in the Indiana Dunes area, and we often just hear about the Potawatomi.
We are very close with the Potawatomi. So culturally speaking, they are really close to us. We are heavily intermarried with the Potawatomi. So that was done historically and even today. I'm actually part Potawatomi on my grandmother's side. So, I have Potawatomi ancestry. We're physically very close to them. When we retreated to Wisconsin during the Beaver Wars, we went to live with the Potawatomi. So we're very close with them. And even today, we will often attend the same events together. I was just at a conference with a bunch of the Potawatomis up in Wisconsin 2 weeks ago. So we do work pretty closely with them. You will hear more about them because they have their government up there. I believe it's the Gun Lake tribe. They're in Indiana, which was pretty unique for a while there. But that's not true anymore. We actually do have trust land in Indiana. So we are getting back to, we actually have legal protected land there. So they're not the only tribe in Indiana anymore. And if you could ever consider them, that they ever were. But yes, the fact that they are there, their citizens are there, is why you hear a lot more about them than us in the past. But that is going to become less and less the case, especially in the Indiana Dunes region. We actually just partner with the Indiana Dunes Park to have an indigenous cultural trail, and it highlights both Potawatomi and Miami culture and history. So highly recommend looking that up and going if you guys haven't or aren't aware of it. It's very nice. It's a really cool ecosystem up there. I mean, you'll get cactuses and pine trees. It's really, really interesting, unique place.
That's awesome. Thanks, Logan. We have one more question in the chat. And Teresa Galley says, first, Josiah White's had a Native American boarding school from 1882 to 1885, which is in Wabash County. And there's some pictures and records at Wabash County Museum. So that's a great resource if people are wanting to learn more about that history, it sounds like.
Yep. And more research is going into that. So more and more books and articles are about to come out in the next few years that are going to be really high quality, take Native perspectives into account when discussing these things. So just wait a little bit longer and there will be all sorts of things, all sorts of resources on boarding schools.
Yeah, that's great. Sarah Johnson asked if you could speak more about the splitting up of reservation land into family allotments and its effects on culture.
Yeah, so in a lot of reservations, we lived communally. So when we were in our traditional homelands, we lived in one big village. Everyone lived together. All the land was held as a community. We all worked the same places. You might have a small family garden next to your house, but the cornfields were everyone's, and everyone helped there. Everyone pitched in. It's the same thing about stomp dancing, is that our communities were meant to work as one big unit, not individual families working to just serve themselves. And we still lived like that when we were removed to Kansas and Oklahoma. But when we got to Oklahoma, the American government really didn't like that we were living like that. So they actually broke our reservation lands into individual family allotments so that people could not legally work as one unit to help build community. So that separated us. So that sense of community and sense of belonging started to break down relatively quickly, especially once the boarding school period started. So you have all of the young folks having our culture beaten out of us. We have our families being split apart. And then we have the fact that there's no money in Ottawa County, Oklahoma. So you have farms that are falling apart because, the parents or grandparents might own this farm, but it doesn't really make too much money. And then their kids don't want to work it, and their grandkids don't want to work it, so they eventually just sell it. Recently, it was always the case, but recently oh goodness, what's the word? With the McGirt decision, the Supreme Court upheld that all of our reservations, unless they were dissolved by Congress, are still reservations. They didn't actually have the legal right to break these up into family allotments. They did it anyway because we couldn't stop them. But now with the McGirt decision, legally speaking, our reservation is one reservation again, which is a really cool thing. We're going to see what happens with that, because that makes most of Oklahoma reservation land and not state land, which carries a lot of issues, some good ones and some bad ones. We don't have any issue because we have a really good relationship with the towns that surround us. We actually bailed them out during COVID with people's water bills, because the city was going to have to shut off people's water during COVID because nobody could pay for it. And we actually paid some of the city's water bills around us. So we have a really good relationship. But that's not always the case. Governor Stitt in Oklahoma, he is very anti-tribe. He does not like us. And in places like Kansas City, about half of it is legally a reservation now. But almost none of the tribe actually lives there. So it causes weird legal things to happen when that's the case. But it's starting to smooth out, and we're starting to figure out exactly what the new status quo is there.
Thank you for sharing. I know that there were a couple of in-person questions over here, so we'll let them go ahead and ask those.
You may just talk out loud.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you hear me okay there, Logan?
Yes.
Okay, so question number one, that community blog, is that just one word or all three words to find that blog?
The double A word will pull it up. You can also just Google Miami Community Blog or Miami Tribe Community Blog, and it'll be the first one to pop up.
Okay, that was question number one. Question number two, unlike my colleague Bill Munn, I'm interested in the French period.
Mm-hmm.
Will I find anything on that French period if I go to the community blog, or is there a better place to look?
You'll find a little bit of it in there. And if you're missing anything, we have a lot of Jesuit journals, so French priest journals that I could actually just, if you shot me an email, could probably get you a lot of them. They're available to the public, available at the Library of Congress online for free, which are from the 1680s into the 1720s, some of the very first Europeans encountering Miami people. So you get a lot of culture in there. Especially into the 1720s, you start getting more and more military resources. Exploring the French period is something we're actively doing right now. So it's not as well documented as, we'll say, like the 1750s into the 90s with the British. But it is something that's on there a little bit. George Ironstrack, his dissertation is about Pickawillany, which was a British settlement, but it involves a lot of politicking with the French and actually a little bit of Ottawa, I believe, and how the French didn't want Miami people to be settling there to involve themselves with the British. So there is a lot of resources out. I wouldn't say that I know of any particular book that would be great to look into. I would just say when reading about these things, read it with a grain of salt, because of the people who wrote them oftentimes didn't write them with our perspective in mind, or their perspective would be anti-us. So just remember that when you're reading this. That's why I recommend those Jesuit journals, because the Jesuits had a goal in mind when they went there, but they were actually pretty accurate in recording what was happening. So you'll get to see a lot of really cool stuff that you won't see elsewhere. And with that museum in France that I mentioned earlier with the painted bison robes, that partnership doesn't just involve those robes. We're actually also looking into a lot of the resources they have about us. And it is quite extensive, but right now it's all in French. So we're having it translated, but that takes a long time and is very expensive. And a lot of them are scans of documents that are 300 years old. So you can't just like copy and paste it in a Google Translate and call it good enough, because that's not how it works.
Right, that's hard. Okay, last two questions, kind of political, so you can tell me it's not able to be answered, but is there any interest among the community of returning to the original lands? And the second question, can you help us on the outside kind of understand the disharmony, if there is any, or the conflict, if there is any, between Oklahoma, Miami, and Indiana, Miami? Because that seems to be causing some issues over here on this side.
Yeah, that is a loaded question. I'll answer the first one first. The desire to have us move back to Indiana, I think it's a really cool idea. But the issue with it is that, most of us have lived in Oklahoma our entire lives. My great-grandparents are from Oklahoma. So the idea of uprooting our whole people all over again is not one that's very popular. And also, where would we go? We have individuals who are moving back. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. So we have individuals who are moving back to the homelands, and we have a cultural resource extension office and trust land in the Fort Wayne area in myaamionki, which is one of our biggest villages. But to have the actual government move back there is something that I think isn't really in the cards right now. It's not really a goal that we have realistically. Maybe someday it will be. I do think it would be very interesting, but for now, I just don't see it happening. As for your second question, I can only speak to that so much. I'm only allowed to talk so much about this. What I will say is that the Miami Nation of Indiana, MNI, are our relatives. They are Miami people. The disagreement is on whether they are a separate tribe or not. And today we are a federally recognized tribal group, not a tribal group, we are a tribe, which is not just a group of Native people. And I think a lot of people don't actually understand what a tribe is. We are a sovereign nation. We have political rights and obligations to our people. We have the rights of nations. We are, technically speaking, we are outranked states. In theory, in practice, that is not always the case, because there are more of them and they're more powerful. They have more money and police and all these things. So that's not always technically true. But in theory, we are just under the United States, because militarily speaking, we can't say anything else. But MNI is a 501c3 nonprofit company that is located in Peru, Indiana, and it is made up by Miami people. The disagreement is just on whether they are a tribe or not, if they are a separate people than us.
Thank you.
Other than that, I can't say anything. I'm only allowed to speak so much on it. It is something that gets brought up quite a bit. It is something that is very important to us, but that we view as more of an internal Miami issue rather than something we talk too much with to the public.
Yeah, understand. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, anyone in MNI that is Miami can join the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. About half of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma's citizenship is in the Indiana region. Once we opened up our roles to them, we about doubled in size. So most of the Indiana folks are in the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma today.
Logan, I'm seeing one more question in the chat from Sarah. She says, another question, I am working for the Indiana Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology and currently working on trivia questions for 4th grade students. I realized in updating our deck that there were no questions about Native Americans. Do you have any specific topics I should cover? So any sort of like recommendations for that elementary grade level of?
I like that. I mean, the community blog, I would go there for your facts. I mean, anything on there I would say is fair game. You could talk about our lunar calendar. You could talk about our history blogs. I would heavily recommend looking into modern culture and some of the projects we're working on down in Oklahoma. I wouldn't focus too much on the past or too much on the nature aspect of it. We like to fight against the fact that we are a people of the past. So anytime we talk about the past, we always bring it into the present when we do. And the nature thing, we are close with nature. We actually don't have a word for nature or outside. We could say you're outside of something, but not outside as in the great outdoors. So we are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature, to us. But we also don't like to, make people think that we are like one with nature, shaman people, druids or anything like that. We're human beings. We've made our own mistakes when it comes to over harvesting things. So we also don't want to focus too much on that, but I would definitely look into it as well. I mean, really anything you can see on that blog would be amazing to look into. But I would look into modern day Miami culture the most, or modern day Native American different tribal cultures, because one thing that I should also say, if you guys want to remember, there's no such thing as Native American culture. That's not a thing, because it's like saying European culture. Just because Britain and Romania are European doesn't mean that when you talk about the Eiffel Tower that they have anything to do with that, because that's French. The Miami people and the Potawatomi, as close as we are two very different people. We have different languages and cultures. And when you start to talk about people that are even further away, like the Ottawa or the Tlingit or the Quapaw, they're completely different than us. So just keep that in mind when you're teaching or reading about Native American people. Remember that Native American is like saying European or Asian or African. There are hundreds and thousands of us, different languages and different cultures and different tribes. There's 574 different federally recognized tribes in the United States, all with a different language, all with different cultures. So when you're learning about it, just keep that in mind. It's an important aspect that I think people don't realize a lot of the time, especially when it comes to popular media. They like to portray us as very similar and and it's just not the case.
Thanks, Logan. I think we have time for one more question if anybody has one they would like to ask. And if not, we can go ahead and wrap up. I am sure you're probably open to people connecting with you after the presentation.
I'll actually put my my email in the chat. Part of my job is to do public outreach and public education. So I work on projects with people from all over. I partner with Indiana Dunes National Park. I partnered with libraries. That's part of what I do, is not just talks, it's also projects, signage, curriculum, anything like that. Anything I can do to connect people with actual Miami history or actual Miami culture, that part of my actual job. So please, if you guys have questions or ideas, feel free to email me.
Well, thank you so much, Logan. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to give a little bit of a plug for the History Center before we all sign off. I wouldn't be doing my job well if I didn't. We are always looking for different programming like this to offer people. So if anyone has anything you'd love to see from the History Center, please let us know. We hope to have Logan back again in the future to speak with us more. We also have in the Indiana History and Genealogy room and the museum volunteer opportunities and things for people to get involved with. So if anyone is looking for ways to get plugged in with local history, whether that be Miami history or other facets of local or public history, we're always happy to have more people on board for the work that we do. So Logan, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.